Welcome to Table Talk, where we dive into the stories of business families and their journeys. Today we're joined with Rohit Gupta, President and CEO of the Rohit Group. We're going to talk a little bit more about his journey. Rohit and the Gupta family were also a signature family at our 2017 signature event. Again, thank you for being involved with ABFI 7-8 years ago, and again this week. Let's maybe start by giving us a little bit of an introduction of yourself and maybe a 30-second elevator pitch of the Rohit Group for those that don't know about it.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Matt. Appreciate the opportunity. A little bit about myself. Been with the business now since 2002. Officially, I've been unofficially unpaid worker a few times before that, and sometimes under the table paid worker too. And so, but it's been a great journey with the family. Our business was incorporated in '86, and today we're as a business we exist in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario. Specifically, we're working in land development, new home building. We've got a retail grocery anchored business. We've got offices in our portfolio. We've got a healthcare facility that we're working with Covenant Health. We're building Southeast Edmonton, which would be our social infrastructure side of our business that we're trying to get launched off the platform. We have a spin-out platform called BuildBase out of Rohit Group, and we used to be in the hospitality and industrial businesses. We're no longer in those businesses. So a very enterprising family is to give you just a little snippet of us.
Nice. And tell us about how you came to join the family business.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Before I officially joined in 2002, it was my sister that was supposed to join the business, and I was supposed to be the guy traveling the world. And we ended up actually reversing roles. And she traveled the world and got to live in cool places, and I ended up joining the family business. And the way I ended up joining was I kind of had too much fun in university and didn't focus enough on my applications for my master's program and so forth. And so the day after exams ended, I needed a job. And so it's kind of like, okay, my mom needs some help with her spreadsheets, and I'm a computer engineer. So we've got a marriage of two needs that need to be met. And so the day after my last exam in engineering school, I was at work at 7:30 in the morning. And that's how it started. And so it's, I would love to tell you there was like this serendipitous strategy to it, but it was very simple.
Okay, so it kind of started out as looking for a job right after university, trying to figure out how you can use your skills in a way that would also help your parents run their business.
Yeah, and then there's, again, I'm a very utilitarian personality type. It did help that there was a .com bust that started 6 months earlier, right? And so getting a .com job or an IT job as a new grad in Alberta meant that your base salary was starting around $32,000 to $36,000 a year, and that wasn't really a fun time to be graduating while oil was booming, housing was booming.
Yeah. So kind of never part of the original plan to join the family business, and more of a let's take this opportunity and see how it fits into kind of your overall growth and development as a young adult.
No, in fact, it was interesting. Like as a whether it was high school or university, my friends knew more about my business than I actually knew about my business. And they tended to care more about like, hey, you guys are a substantial family. You guys are doing some interesting things in the market. I'm like, sure. And my mind was always a tech or nuclear physics or space. Like if I was going to stay in tech, I wanted to go into gaming and working with groups like BioWare. That was what Ray Mazika and Greg Zeschuk had done. That was just amazing, and we wanted to be part of that team. Or it was about being a nuclear physicist and working on fusion and fission and stuff like that. Like my interest was nothing related to bricks and mortar.
Okay. Right. So tell us about how you started out, as a Excel assistant or whatever you wanted to call yourself back then, and eventually became president and CEO. How did that transition occur? What were some of the steps? How long did that take?
Yeah, so interesting. Like the best way to, if I can be really reductive about it, is I think teams exist in threes. right? One where somebody who's visioning, somebody who's collecting, and then somebody who's running. And so my dad was the visionary, and he was trying to create different opportunities. My mom was making sure that we collected the money, both on the revenue side, and we controlled it properly from the expense perspective. And then somebody had to run the operations. And so we've just happened to stumble into a platform between the three of us, and each part of these cogs, whether it was my mom as she's tired out of the business, somebody else stepped in like a Russell, and then we changed our roles within that team. And then as my dad has started retiring, somebody else has stepped in. But I think you start rotating in teams of threes. Okay. And it's a trifecta. And I don't know why, but that's how my observation has been. And so if you look at that concept, we were really strong with the visionary when I joined with my father, and really strong on the control side with my mother, but the operational side struggled. And so my job when I joined, I just naturally just gravitated towards the operational side. I'm very much of a philosophy of, if I can do it tomorrow, just do it today. If I can do it today, do it yesterday type of concept. And just aggressive, just do, and just keep performing. And so I'm more of an operational mindset than anything else. And so that this trifecta just started existing, and my father kept on creating opportunities for us. And he has this insatiable ability to find opportunity and create opportunity. And so there's always a vacuum behind him. And this vacuum you had to walk into it. Otherwise there's chaos to be had. And there's lots of times of chaos, and he's the consummate entrepreneur that wants to start something new every day. Yeah. And so it was more than anything during my journey, it was less about here's the structured form by which you're going to grow. And it was more about how aggressive I was going to be willing to be, and to create the opportunities for myself within the shop. Okay. Right. And so if I look today, the journey would have been, I started in IT, helped my mom out in procurement, would have gone into sales, got fired out of sales because I was a terrible sales manager, back into operations, gone into construction, effectively started taking over operations, and then moved it back into sales management and trying to structure that out. And then at one point was running our Edmonton, Calgary housing operations, while Dad was running the land and finance side of the business. And eventually I got into finance and got exposed there, replaced myself out of finance, went back into operations, looked at different, during the GFC, I got into restructuring, or trying to find restructuring opportunities, and so really just trying to create multiple different streams all the time. Mm-hmm. And I would say about 2014, when the market really started changing southward, that's where my father, I believe it was 2014 or 2015, 2014, I believe he said, you should be president of the company. And I remember saying, I don't think I'm ready. And then one of our leaders, Russell, pulled me aside and goes, look, I think you need to stop whining, right? When opportunities show up, you take them, because these opportunities don't exist for everybody. It just happens to be your family business, so your dad's giving you the ability to choose. Yeah. Right? So grow up, take the mantle, and do your job. And so it was kind of, and if you meet Russell, he's not a small man. He's got a few inches on me, right? And he's got a pretty strong grip. So, okay. So you're like, okay, he says you're doing this, you're doing this. So it was one of those defining moments that really just said, look, just do it and walk through the door. Don't have fear. And I feel sorry for the team sometimes, because they had to go through that journey with me. Even though I had been 12 years in the business, I'd been exposed to going from 16 employees. At that time, we were about 140 employees. So I grew with the team. It's not like I just parachuted in or albatrossed into the team. Yeah. But it was still a tough journey for the team to adapt to the change in leadership style, from how my father ran it on a day-to-day basis to how I ran it on a day-to-day basis. That being said, the transition from my father to me has not been necessarily an easy one either. And so, but that's how I came to be from junior level IT network support guy up to today.
So when you joined the business, you were talking about how, your dad had that visionary style where he would be more, he had the dream and would kind of, I think you talked about the leadership vacuum where he'd give you the dream and kind of walk away and you'd be left to kind of execute it. Mm-hmm. How have you transitioned between being the one executing the dreams to being the one helping to come up with the dreams?
Well, I guess you should ask the team. That's the better answer. But I would say it's been struggle, right? I'm still very much a doer than just a very hands-off personality. So sometimes I can be a wet blanket to my team, even though I've got the vision. But if they don't hit the vision, then I start being a wet blanket and being a little bit prescriptive. Mm-hmm. And so it's been challenging. I think the easiest part has been if I'm able to find the team member that is able to execute the dream or execute the vision, I tend to be very laissez-faire, right? But if they're not able to execute, then I'm very up in their grill and trying to just push on them and trying to get to execute it. But we've been blessed. I found some really great leaders that have come in behind me on the team. That have been able to build really great teams that allow them to scale with us in the business and rapidly grow. So when I joined, our assets under management would have been about 25 million and we're 50x now, right, on that basis, on that business on today's basis. And we're trying to double the enterprise again in the next 6 years. So what we did in the first 38 years, we're trying to do in the next 6 years type of deal. Okay. And so the momentum has picked up, and so I think winning begets winning. Okay. And so I'm allowed to be crazier in my current style, and I think I'm more migrating towards where my dad was at my age. And I get to be crazier and have bigger dreams, but I've got a really great operating platform behind me that allows me to do that.
Okay. So tell us maybe a little bit more about that growth strategy. What does that look like? Is it about, doing more of what you're doing in the same market? Is it expanding to new markets? How does that fit into kind of the strategy and that next doubling in the next 6 years? Yeah.
So I would say, if we, like any Alberta business that's existed here, 2014 was a really pivotal moment. As much as we'd like to talk about COVID or we like to talk about the GFC, if any business that's come through the 2000s up until 2014, that would be the most pivotal moment for us, in the sense that we knew that the capex was not going to exist in the Fort McMurray market at $100 billion plus. We knew that the social license, even though we were trying to push for it through the Notley government, may or may not come through. There's a high likelihood of failure for oil and gas. And then we recognized that capital markets were reforming also and changing with low interest rate environments and everything. So I would say we had to get rid of our hospitality business in the Kootenays. We had to work towards looking at the lending side of the business and say, does that really make sense for our capital? We had to relook at our Fort McMurray operations, which was half our business at the time, and try to get out of that. So we exited those businesses. Okay. We had to prune the tree quite a bit. And what we ended up doing was we got aggressively into the retail. We opened new markets like Calgary, Saskatchewan, Regina, and Ottawa. And we started looking at infrastructure plays, like we're talking with Covenant Health. All of these different asset classes or business models and geographic diversification took place over the last decade or so. And so the next decade for us is now to harvest those asset classes or expand into those markets. Less so trying to create new new asset classes or new geographies at this point.
Okay. Right. Yeah, we were talking a little bit before the show about kind of the growth in the Edmonton and Alberta markets with family businesses and families looking specifically at the real estate. Mm-hmm. So I think there's an article a while ago where it was about 80% of new transactions in Edmonton were private owned or family owned, and most of those were buying from institutional investors. Can you maybe talk about why you think that might be and why you see the trends looking like that?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a complex answer. It's like I'll be kind of maybe an economist and get half a dozen this, half a dozen that. But so if we were to break in within real estate investor classes, we'd say there's one that's institutional capital or pension funds. We'd say capital allocators, which would be like REITs or asset managers, and then let's look at a third group, which would be high net worths or family offices or families. And then the fourth would be the retail investor. And if we look at these four groups, in the last 2-3 years, what we've seen is this rapid rise of interest rates. We've seen massive inflation, and that rapid rise of interest rates, inflation, and combined with government debt at the federal level, has really changed the equation for pension fund managers or institutional capital. And it was interesting, what I've started realizing recently is that Canada means Toronto and Vancouver. It doesn't mean everything. And so for a lot of these pension fund managers, like whether they're CPPIB or Hoop or whoever it is, this real volatility or change that's come out after dislocation coming out of COVID has said to them, well, Toronto is not a great investment opportunity today. It's a core. Why don't we take this opportunity to diversify? And so they've started saying, let's go to US, let's go to Europe and look for opportunities there. And they're just flying over the prairies. And so we're flyover country. We're just not a deep enough market for them. And so we're seeing an exodus from these institutional capitals in the market. And specifically, it's the office space that they're trying to divest out of. We say commercial real estate, we talk about this wall of debt. It's not necessarily retail or industrial. They're still hot on industrial and multifamily, but they're specifically saying, let's relook at how we are investing in office on today's basis. The REITs, and with the higher interest rate environment, changing their share prices, have started really looking at their operational know-how, and they're trying to figure out how do they extract more value out of them. So they haven't been buying a lot of inventory either across the country, but they're geographically a little bit more constrained. So that leaves us with high net worth families. Okay. So if you're in Toronto or Vancouver, and you're looking for yield on your investments, Alberta's been a great market. Like, Alberta's been a screaming awesome market through COVID. With immigration, we've seen, from a real estate perspective, we've seen lots of demand. We've started seeing businesses starting to relocate into Alberta. If you look at de Havilland, you look at the investment that WestJet made into its infrastructure, you look at Infosys coming in, you talk about Emphasis coming in as IT firms into Alberta, and then you start looking at even the Dow chemical plant on the what's happening in the heartland of Edmonton. So you're seeing a lot of operating businesses saying, this makes a lot of jurisdictional sense for us, a lot of investment sense. So Alberta has got intra-provincial growth, interprovincial, and new immigration coming into the market. For high net worth families, they're not necessarily looking for, or business families, they're not necessarily looking for opportunities in Europe or US. This is the perfect opportunity. The institutional capital is dropping some assets. They've got long-term views. So they and I look at like an office building, like a coal mine. It could have great cash flows today or for the next 5 years, 10 years, but the valuation pop is maybe 15 years out, 20 years out. And so that longer horizon view is starting to take place. And that's that would be my thesis for why you're seeing some of these transactions take place today.
Okay. And when we think a little bit, changing gears a little bit, when we think about the kind of the growth that the business has seen, how has that impacted kind of the family business dynamics with yourself and your parents and your sister and the family? Like, what do those conversations look like today versus 10 years ago?
Yeah, like, look, when we're building homes, you build a home, you sell a home, you're constantly. The development business is a high risk business, and so you're always as soon as you take on a bet, you make a bet, you're talking about how do I get rid of the bet off my table and de-risk myself constantly. And so it was always a run, shorter time horizon view of a year to 2 year type of view. As our capital pool is starting to grow and we're starting to take long dated investment strategies, whether it's office buildings, retail centers, residential rental buildings, what we're finding is there's this ballast that's starting to exist within the family and this fear of being Punxsutawney Phil is starting to disappear, and we're starting to become we're starting to sit back and say, you know what, we recognize this bet's going sideways, but we can wait it out, right? And so we don't have to be as right as often as we used to be, and we're becoming enterprising, and not necessarily at the micro deal level, but at the macro deal, we can take bigger bets, and we can swing for the fences a little bit more on bigger deals that will allow the firm to jump. It's also starting to so within the business, the deals we're making or where we're willing to invest is changing, but how we're investing with our team is also changing, right? And whereas with my mom, my father, and I, when it was just like, yeah, if we need to work out of a trailer, let's do that. But we're now starting to invest back into our team. So we just moved from suburbs of Edmonton into downtown Edmonton. We moved our Calgary office from the suburbs to the downtown. And we're starting to say, how do we invest and how do we create great working spaces? So we're starting to take long-term views from that perspective. But it's also starting to change the dialogue within the family outside that aren't involved in the business to start saying, hey, look, you got this honey pot that's been developing. How are you going to utilize it? Like, the worst thing you can do is preserve it. Either enjoy it, party with it like crazy, own a yacht, be in Mykonos, do something crazy, or actually use it for a utilitarian perspective of either helping the community or starting a business, or how do you start looking at that? So we're starting to find we're able to maybe help existing family members look beyond their existing occupation within their spaces and starting to envision a different future, or some of the complaints they may have had about society, starting to work on those items. And so the dialogue's changing that way too. So we're lifting our head from the steering wheel to start and look at the road.
It's kind of more what the family or what the individuals in that family, where their values are and where they want to invest and grow in those areas.
Yeah. So the dialogue's forming around it. But it's in the formative area. Generation on that.
And so thinking back to the signature event, I think there was a fair bit of conversation about philanthropy there, and kind of went around 3 pillars at the time, I think. And it was around homelessness, mental health, and the Indo-Canadian community. How is kind of that, is that pillar approach still what you follow for kind of that investment thesis in the community? Or has that shifted with the family?
I would say the investment thesis is similar. We're still trying to focus on that aspect of it. I would say the business is creating different opportunities that don't necessarily follow those pillars, and we're starting to partner with different municipalities and trying to take advantage of the opportunity that they are giving us. And in the terms of, like, we look at the city of St. Albert, we were able to donate some land, residual land, for them to help them build a rec facility and build a better community, right? We were working with, just right now, we're working with the city of Edmonton donating a park to them, right? But it's related to a land development play that we have. So the business is also starting to riff off of what the family is doing. So if we look at the family and the business as 2 separate entities, they're riffing off of each other. If we look, and they're evolving with each other's plays, or each other's activities. So from a family perspective, we're still defined in that smaller, trying to use those pillars as a guiding light. And when I say family, that's my mother, my father, and I. But when we start going to the broader family, they have their own streams and they have their own activities that they want to do. So definition of family matters.
And it's very difficult in business families to really have that definition really clear. When we think a little bit about, the changes in this complexity and how you define family and the growth of the business, how have you looked at governance over the last 10 years, and how have you looked at maybe implementing or formalizing some more of the governance mechanisms within the business family?
So I would say I started thinking about family businesses in the mid 2000s. That's when I started getting exposed to the concept. And when we did the signature event, we were just starting to talk about maybe having an advisory board. Okay. We're now 6 years into the journey of or sixth year in our journey of advisory boards. And at that time, I looked at them as, frankly, was like, we need a Scotch club that for somebody who can help us grow our influence within the community. We need some of these political players or people who are well connected. That was kind of the initiating part of why we should form an advisory board, but also at the same time help the CEO think through the business problems. Yeah. That'd be a good idea, right? And if I fast forward to today, and frankly, I looked at fiduciary boards as straitjackets. They're straitjackets that inhibit business entrepreneurialism. They're talking about controls. They overprice risk. They talk about risk, and they get me to be negative. And really, do we want to go down this journey? And does this really make sense? And as I've started reading more and more, and my thinking is evolving, and my dad is aging, and my mom is becoming less interested in the business, day-to-day functionality, and the family is less and less likely to take over the business if something were to happen to me. It's the journey has evolved into we need an advisory board that is really starting to move us to a pseudo fiduciary structure. Yeah, and allows the family to retain control as shareholder, director, and operator, right? To assuming that the family is only a shareholder and maybe a director, and most likely not an operator if I'm not around.
Yeah, so just like a shotgun clause to a fiduciary board.
Right, effectively. So there's a lot of thinking and that's happening. And the advisory board has really helped with that. I would say a couple of the key items where we're really gaining with that is making sure that we didn't bring on anybody thus far that had a previous relationship with the family, or the business itself. Yep. Has been a big part of this. And that level of independence allows us to get past the dialogue about my kids and my family, and allows us to really talk about the business and how do we structure it appropriately and navigate and push us. And so that's been really helpful as the leader of the business, but also helped me navigate some of the issues that I may have with my parents and their transition to me and their exit out of the day-to-day operations. And our next set of board members that we're trying to bring on are also, again, independent from the business. We may have interactions and micro interactions, but they don't foundationally know the business in depth or know the family in depth. And so I think that structure is going to be really powerful for us, especially at the rate we're growing from a capital-based perspective, the types of deals we're chasing. If we want to bring in future capital partners into our enterprise, the board helps us create proper structure, but also allows the existing shareholders to have comfort that there's some structure for the future.
Yeah, really looking at, we were talking earlier too about how, whether it's a family business or a business, still the ultimate goal is that shareholder value piece. Yeah. And a lot of family businesses don't look at it that way sometimes. Yeah. But it really is important to look at, how are you doing the right things for your shareholders and the right things for your legacy. Yeah. This has been a great conversation so far. Please stick with us as we'll be right back. Just wanted to take a quick moment and thank some of our sponsors who helped put on the show today. Thank you very much to Bennett Jones, QV Investors, and Results. Without the support from the three of you, we wouldn't be able to do Table Talk today. So thank you again. You mentioned a little bit about, the importance of having those directors who might not have those relationships or know your kids. Let's talk a little bit about that. Where do you see, with your son, his involvement with the business in the future? What are you doing to raise that next generation? Understanding that, I think you mentioned he's 6 right now. Yeah. So, he's probably not going to be taking over the business in the next 10 years.
Yeah, it's well, that's an interesting question. I always ask him how you installed drywall, and he keeps chewing it. So I keep telling people. So people ask me, "Are you going to leave the business for him?" I'm not going to lie. I'd love for him to take over. Definitely going to pull strings, and I'm going to socially engineer him the best way I can to make sure he comes in and takes over the enterprise. But the likelihood of failure is super high.
Yep.
Right? In terms of, you have to have passion for what you do. And then second, you have to have competency to, understand the guts of the business, but then be able, and then third, have a competency in leading people.
Yeah.
Right? Those are three components. And once we start working our way through, probability is probably 1 to 5% that the individual is competent enough to, and passionate enough to lead the business. And that's on today's vision of what the business today. But between now and 20 years out, the business is going to have a lot of jukes and jives.
Yeah.
Unless we're static, the probability starts accelerating downward or decelerating that, or lowering that the success is going to be there. So, and then there's this other X factor that exists out there. I've had friends who passed away in their early 40s, and I'm 45. So my ticker is anywhere between now and 20 years. There's a probability, a non-zero chance there. So we're starting to try to figure out, my wife and I talk about this, is talk about values, about what do we value the most with our kid, or what values do we believe are going to be intrinsic, and then what skill sets are going to be intrinsically needed as they move forward. And we're trying to lay that roadmap out, create those opportunities for him as an individual. We're also looking, I'm always scouring nieces and nephews and seeing that they, even though they may not be in the immediate family, but they may be the right people that may be leaders or the part of the business. So trying to always keep the eyes open. Yep. For a professional CEO or downstream, but that maybe come from the extended family structure. Mm-hmm. But then the third component that we're looking at is, how do we make sure that the business is liquid? Yeah. So we're starting to talk at a strategic level from a business and trying to change the narrative that we have, let's say, land and housing as one business, and then we have our income producing properties of residential, retail, office, and social infrastructure as another business, right? Which business can the family run more as a shareholder with lower risk, and or on a risk return curve is up the curve on returns relative to risk, whereas and which business does that, and which business would the family be better off having professional managers in, and which business does the family need to be involved in? And we're trying to create liquidity for the business that the family has to be involved in. And if I'm not around and the family doesn't want to be involved, we have to potentially start talking about exits and how do we make sure the business moves that way. So so these are all these considerations that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. And it took a while, frankly. And when I say while, I'm not talking like a few months. I'm talking about like years, 5, 6 years, 7 years, organic discussions that you should be talking about these things, but you're kind of ignoring. Mm-hmm. And then somebody says something and you're like, okay, now I got to make a decision. Yeah. And so that's how this evolution's taken place for us. And so I look at ours, if I'm around for another 30 years and my son comes into the business and he has the passion and the competency, mm-hmm. we'll probably retain the land and housing business long term into the third generation. But if it's a situation where 20 years from now or 10 years from now, I kick the bucket, then we're going to have to talk about how are we exiting the land and housing business through a sale and try to keep the IPP business long term. Yeah.
Well, and kind of the scale and complexity of the business changes as well.
Yeah.
So when you walked into the business, there were, I think, I can't remember the number you said, 16, 17 employees.
Yeah.
Right. And now, if your son was going to walk into the business 10 years or 20 years from now, the employee count is going to be exponential.
Oh, yeah. Like right now we're at 260-ish people, I think it is, right? Spread out across Canada. And I would not I would assume in 20 years, if we're still really successful at what we're doing, we'll be in the US. So he'll probably be in not just 3 provinces, he'll be in 3 or 4 states. When I joined, I was in Edmonton and Fort Mac, right? And if I needed to I need to learn something about foundations and framing a house, I sat at the dinner table I went to site and then I sat at the dinner table. That opportunity won't exist for him, right? So that's going to be a different journey. So
that's good. And when we look at, kind of when a new leader comes into a family business, whether, it's the next CEO that comes into your business or your son, what kind of advice would you have for that individual? Whether it's your business or another business, what should you look at as a leader of a family business, and what are some of the unique things to consider? What do you need to think about from a leadership perspective?
Yeah, I would understand. Okay, so this is going to be a meandering answer, but I would say DNA of capital. That really needs to be understood. Every business has a DNA of capital. Some are people who want to be really aggressive growth and gambling, and some is very risk averse.
Yep.
Right. So understanding the shareholder, what their return requirements are, where their risks are, appetites there, where there isn't, I think that's where you need to start first. Because if there's a misalignment, it doesn't matter what's happening in the operations, that'll obliterate. The second is you will never have as much information or knowledge about the business as the founder will.
Yeah.
Right. Or the person that's been in the business for 10, 20 years. So if we think about society today as more of an individualistic society than we were 50 years ago, our terms with the organizations are shrinking. But a family business doesn't have that. They're still stuck in a paradigm that existed 100, 200 years ago, right? And so they're married to this business for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years when this new CEO is jumping into it. And you have to feel comfortable always being, the dumbest kid in the smart kids row, but at the same time, creating new opportunities, relying on the past, relying on the stories, relying on the knowledge, but still trying to allow that information to flow between pre-existing family and the existing employees that were there before you were inserted in, and allowing them to have that directional conversation. But at the same time, creating a new vision for where the business needs to go.
Yeah.
Right? Because just because it worked last year, or I guess there's a hysteresis that would exist in that family from, we sold this piece of bread this way, or we sold this house this way 30 years ago. Why do we have to do it this different way? Well, the world's changing. And part of the reason you're an external CEO is you're supposed to change the way the family does business.
Yep.
Right? Or the business moves forward. So navigating that change management is a super big part of it. And bringing the family along on the journey, I think is part of that too. And I've learned this the hard way. As been the leader, it's you as much as your vision or your ideas may be right or appropriate for that environment, that trust or that personal relationship is super important with the previous generation. And if that erodes, it really adds, it's a different form of tax. And it just slows the organization down, slows the decision making down, and it creates a lot of frustration on all parties that are involved. And so you have to really be thinking about how to create an environment of openness. How do you understanding the DNA of the capital, and trying to figure out how to allow communication to be bilateral but still directionally forward.
Okay. So kind of like putting your own spin on the direction and the strategy, but still being true to the roots and the legacy.
Yeah.
Nice. One of the questions I like to ask on all of the episodes is about, is there kind of like a big influential book or learning or course or something that you did at some point in your life that has really impacted how you look at business?
There's lots of incremental. I'd say I'll give you maybe some verbal diarrhea again.
Okay.
We call one of the great books was Eliyahu Goldratt's The Goal.
Yep.
I still pick that up, right? And it's such an easy book. It's such an easy read, but it's so foundational to how one can look at businesses left, right, center. I haven't found any book as easy as that helped me change or reform the business, and I still go back to that one.
Yep.
I love everything that Ram Charan put out from Harvard. He was a professor there, and whatever I could get on performance management or how to look at businesses, that really helped create some foundational thinking for me. The Gita was a book, it's a holy book of in India, from the Hindu religion, and that was really transformational. And it has some real foundational philosophical discussions about how to look at war and how do you make decisions. And it's every decision has good consequences and bad consequences, and sometimes you have to do things that are not popular, but they're necessary evils, and to making decisions and making the organization go forward. And so that was really foundational and helped me sit in this philosophical space. So whenever I'm having trouble thinking through which way should I be going, reverting back into that framework or thinking has really helped me. I would say for families that are starting to think about advisory boards or governance or transitions, I would look at the ICDD program. I'm going through it right now, and it's awesome. It's awesome. I wish I'd done it before I put together my advisory board. Maybe I wouldn't have tried to think about a Scotch club first, and maybe used it and accelerated our journey a little bit better and faster. And then I would say there's lots of different programs around across the country and across North America that bring families together, whether it's Harvard or whether it's Western, whether it's the University of Alberta or so. All these different groups allow you to congregate with other families, but sitting in a learning environment, and they're giving you case studies, and engaging in that is a super powerful way to start seeing, holy shit, I'm not the only screwed up family, and I'm not the only screwed up business, and together we can still be successful. So two wrongs can make a right, I guess. Yeah. But there's this great opportunity to learn about how different groups are doing it and different businesses are doing it. And I think that's been powerful for me and other members of the team.
Awesome. Kind of leads me to another question of thinking back to the signature event many, many years ago.
Yep.
What kind of reflection or impact did that have in your family business journey or in your own journey?
Yeah. So from the signature event, sometimes you think you get mired in the day-to-day activity of saying we're still not good enough. Mm. We're still not doing. And it was really flattering and really appreciated, from the family's perspective and even the business's perspective, that we would get recognized as a firm that's doing some interesting things or has done things right. And so it helped shift our dialogue into a more positive framework.
Okay.
Right. Nice. To say, hey, we're actually not that bad. We're actually good. Right. And this is for anybody who's a new immigrant. When Kamala Harris became vice president back in the day, there was this meme that was floating around with all these Indian second gens, and they had this really disappointed looking dad, and all you saw as the meme was saying, "Vice president? Why only vice president?" Right. And when Rishi Sunak in London became prime minister, there was like, Kamala, look over there. Right. So it's this concept of being just you're either more disappointed or less disappointed was the paradigm we were living in. Kind of just, let's do more. We need to do more.
Yeah.
That's where the ABFI was really helpful for us, right? Like it was good. It was really good for us as a family to hear, to be recognized.
Yeah, so kind of like humbling and validating, but also kind of gave you that right direction to take the next steps.
Yeah. No. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you very much for that. I'll maybe last question, anything that we didn't, or that I didn't ask that you want to talk about or share or dive into? Kind of an odd podcast question.
Yeah. Never. I really struggle, to understand why families or individuals have so much fear of the family business. And I see it in my own family, right? I still really struggle with that. And we talk about how do we become more inclusive to expand opportunities for different minority groups, or how we could create women's rights so we can find this participation workforce, right? But then I look at our family businesses, and family businesses are really good at closing the doors on family members that aren't fitting the mold of the founder or some structure of that nature. And it's a bilateral issue where the family members start rent seeking off the business and not participating and pulling their own weight, right? And my wife and we talk about it quite a bit in different ways, maybe not so explicitly, but one has to really figure out, how do you get the participation rate up from a labor economics perspective of different family members to contribute to the success of the enterprise, and then the enterprise to contribute back. Yeah. And so it's a really interesting issue I've been noodling for a long time. And that's why I look at FEA or ABFI and all these other groups. They're really trying to poke around this in some different ways, but maybe from a wealth management perspective, but not from a labor economics perspective. Yeah.
What is the labor productivity in family businesses?
Right. And so, like, I look at those Vietnamese restaurants sometimes, I'm like, holy shit, they work hard. Like, everybody's in. Or I look at this convenience store, and they're all piling in. So it's amazing when the business is smaller, we pull together much better than when the business is bigger.
Yeah. And it's a very interesting perspective of, that support is almost only there at the beginning or at the small stage.
Yeah. It's kind of like people are really happy to support you when you're not successful, but as soon as you're successful, you got crabs in a bucket right beside you, right? Like you want to make just enough money so that people support you, but not too much money. Otherwise people start pulling you back. Right. And so it's a similar type of paradigm that I've started noticing in other family businesses too. And I never cared about it before, but since my son's been born, we're trying to figure out, how do we get him to work hard at the house? How do we get him to have the same values that my father and my mother instilled in me, and my sister? And how do we propagate that forward? Okay. And how do we propagate the values that my wife's parents put into her? And so it's just an interesting comment. I just thought I wanted to share. And about the business, I would say we as family businesses sometimes become myopic in our view, right? And this comes back to that earlier conversation about institutional capital saying, hey, Toronto and Vancouver aren't working from a real estate perspective, so we're going to go to US and Europe, and we'll find different markets. The groups aren't saying that they're expanding into different markets because those markets are necessarily better. They just need diversification, right? And we as a family businesses sometimes, and even I get in the same trap, start thinking about, wow, Canada's not really working right now, or it's not really that productive. My question always is, where would you rather live? I mean, where would you take your business? Like, if you go to you're going down to LA, you got all sorts of social infrastructure issues. You're going to New York. I don't know, high tax rates there, right? Like, tax rates aren't better. So those are some of the things that we've been looking at. And that's part of the reason we went from Edmonton to Calgary to expand Alberta. We said, let's take advantage of Saskatchewan as a market, because it's similar ethos as Alberta. And then we said, well, I don't want to go to BC, right? Because they're just, yes. Let's go to Ontario, where at least there's manufacturing, there's real jobs, and there's stuff that's happening out there. And like, yes, the US is enticing, but Ontario is also actually a really good market from our business perspective. And so sometimes we ignore our backyard and we start thinking about other opportunities. I would say we like Canada. Canada's been really good to our family, both as people who grew up here, but also immigrated here. And I would really, really encourage families to be really mindful of, when you want to leave or you're looking at different markets, look at the existing market. It may be deeper than you think it is.
Yeah, that's awesome piece of advice to kind of close things up at.
Yeah.
So I just want to thank you very much for your time and for your support of the podcast, but also of ABFI and the University of Alberta over the years. So thank you very much. And lastly, if anyone wants to hear more about you or connect with the Rohit Group, how should they do that?
Yeah, look, I'm on LinkedIn, open on there, rohitgroup.com. You can find us there. And Matt Knight will give you a cell number here soon, hopefully, or something. Matt will give you allow you to connect with us. But no, anytime, like, just reach out, rohitgroup.com, or contact info is there, or come find me on LinkedIn. So thank you very much, Matt.
Thank you.
This series is proudly produced by the team at Road 55. Road 55 creates content that connects. For more information, visit our website at road55.ca.